Now, I don't need to remind nobody of the prices in these grocery stores nowadays. We've all seen it, and it seems like week after week, they go up from a price from last week. And these stores, they've got anything you want. But man, a paycheck can only go so far. You trying to pay bills, raise a family, it's a hard life nowadays. And I'm scared to death that history's going to repeat itself if something don't drastically change. It makes me think too when I look at this stuff, maybe some of you think the same way I do, that how did they survive back in the old days when they didn't have a penny to their name? How did they live? What did they eat? How did they have anything? Well, I'm going to share with you a little video. We'll look back in history and how did these rural people of Appalachia and across America, how did they live? Now this is rural America today, in these Appalachians, but progress is slowly taking it away. But back then, it was even more rural, kind of isolated in places, and these people are self-resilient people. Lived in these mountains, all down this Appalachia chain. And most people didn't have a lot of land. They just didn't have no money. They might have had an acre, 2 acres, and some may even had hundreds of acres. But the common man, he was happy. It was a hard life on him. But if they had a place to grow a little garden and a home and a family, they was happy. And they always managed to have something to eat. They seen to that. Of all their years of being in these old mountains, this is the way the Appalachian people was raised. This is how they lived. Now the stock market in 1929 crashed. It just crashed, plummeted. And money become, people was panicking. They lost everything they've invested. And they rushed to these banks, and these banks just couldn't pay off. They didn't have the cash on hand for people to get their money out, so they had to close their doors. And some was just giving pennies on a dollar. People lost all their savings in these banks. But the Appalachian people, they didn't even know there was depression going on till they maybe went to the store or something a few days later, or seen it in an old newspaper, or got some gossip on it. They didn't know nothing about it. But as time went on, chain reaction. People started, these companies laying off. People laid off, and people trying to get a job, and they laid off by tens of thousands of people. And 2 or 3 jobs come available, they would be thousands of people applying for that job. And it got so bad that they went from town to town trying to find jobs, but there just wasn't no jobs to be had. Just nothing to be had at that time. So a lot of people in these, especially these little cities and stuff, lost everything they had. They was most likely just homeless. They had to hit the road looking for a better life, and it just wasn't there to be found. So many trying to do the same thing. And a lot of them took whatever they had, working the fields, working in these little migrant camps and homeless camps, just trying to survive with the family. Them were hard times. Hard times. And to compound the problem, we had a bad drought out there in the southern Midwest, and it just dried the ground out to a point that these storms would just blow in blow the dust off the ground and pick it up and carry it for hundreds of miles, destroy whole communities, farmland. It didn't matter. Small towns, it was bad. A lot of places, a lot of people died from this dust too. These were hard times. Hard time at them back in them years, early 30s. And I can remember my grandmother telling me that the dust would carry to the east just right in the air once in a while, and it would look something like this. Just dust in the air. But these mountain people and these rural Appalachia people especially, they know what to do. They'd been doing it for generations and generations. Well, you wonder, well, how did they do it? Well, here's how they done it. Now, these people didn't have 2 pennies rubbed together in them days. They didn't have nothing at all. What they had, they either traded for it, made it themselves, bartered for it some way or another, or growed it, or they just done without. That's the way these mountain people was. And they were taught this generation after generation growing in these mountains. Now, one thing they knowed how to do, they knowed how to work the land. And it didn't matter. Here's a set of oxen, plow. Them days are way gone. But they used whatever they had. And here's the tractor of the day. An old set of mules or an old trusty horse. But this is what they used to plow this land with, year after year, working this land. And an old guy could get used to these mules, and them mules would know him, and they would work all day long plowing these big fields, starting these gardens, late winter, early March. And the whole community would work together too. They would sometimes share crop, whatever they got to do to eat. They really didn't make no money, but they just survived in these hard times. And this went on for a long time. And they'd work these fields, especially in this corn. When it started growing, it had to be hoed, or the weeds would take it over and it wouldn't grow. So they'd have to get out here and they'd hoe these fields. Some of them were big fields too. And the whole family worked these fields. Here's a little family here. They all got hoed. They've been working all day long, hoeing this corn. It was hard work. Here's a picture of my grandfather, my uncles, and my mom and aunt. They'd work these cornfields. When they was a little bitty girl, she said, they would go out there and sit on a blanket while Daddy and her uncle brothers would hoe these fields from sun up to sundown. But they prided themselves in these gardens. On a good year, they had a good crop, and they prospered good too. They had a lot left over, and everybody enjoyed the bounty. They would take care of their neighbors, sell, and whatever they had to do, but they enjoyed this bounty, and they had plenty to choose from too on a good year. Plenty. But that was just as much hard work as that was. Here's the really hard work: processing. None of this went to waste. Here they are, peeling apples. It didn't matter if it was apples, tomatoes, corn, potatoes, green beans, breaking them, it didn't matter. Here you are making corn here. It was processing, it was a lot of work. And they didn't, nothing go to waste. This is what got them through the winter. There's another picture of them peeling apples. And they just canned everything. You named it, they canned it. They preserved it. This put them up through the winter, the hard times. And their cellars, root cellars or out back, they full of cans. Green beans, any kind of vegetable you'd think of. And they'd string these green beans up too, dry them out. There wasn't nothing they didn't do to these vegetables out of these gardens. They'd shuck his corn, they would can this corn, and they'd put a bunch in the corn crib and put it up and dry it out. And when they dried it out, they would shuck it, what they wanted to make their cornmeal and stuff out of. They would shuck as much as they wanted. And it was a lot of hard work. It was rewarding, but it was hard work. And they would take this corn after they shucked it off the cob. They'd take it down to their local mill, an old water wheel mill. Every community had one or two around, and they looked like this. Just an old wheel with water running over it, turns it, that runs it. And they'd put their corn down in these hoppers, and it would crush it up between the millstone. Now they didn't have no money, but they traded what they had. They'd give some of their corn to them. They'd trade. They done whatever they had to do. But there's nothing better than fresh ground cornmeal. Good old pan here in a hot skillet. And on these farms, everybody knowed their chores. Everybody pitched in. There was nobody loping around or nothing. Everybody done their part. And you learned at a real early age how to do your chores, how to take care and help the family on these farms. They had a bunch of old milk cows. You'd have to gather them up, and they'd have to milk them in the evening, in the morning. That was just part of it, if you wanted some fresh milk. Here's they processing it. Just hard work. And they took some of this milk and made their own butter too, in these churns. Separate hours churning this milk to turn it into butter. And they made their own molasses out of this sugarcane. They'd feed it in here as that horse went around. You could see here, just ground it up all day long feeding it. They made their own molasses. And they made their own honey too from their own wild bees they captured. Had their own bees. So they didn't have a want for nothing if they worked at it. And for meat, oh yes, they had all kinds of old chickens. It was their livelihood. Chickens was as common as anything. And yeah, they killed these chickens and ate them. I've seen my grandmother kill an old chicken, throw it under a wash tub till it quit flopping, and she'd go to skinning it, fry it for dinner. But they never went to the store hardly at all. There's some things they just couldn't make, like salt and stuff like that, or they had to have little things, so they traded for it. And what did they trade for it? Their eggs. They had a surplus of eggs usually with all their chickens. And they'd take these eggs down, they was as good as cash. They would trade for them. And every little old farm, or little old house or homestead had an old hog where you fed them scraps and slopped the hogs every evening. And them hogs got big too. And every time it got frost season, it was hog killing time. The neighborhood would get together, they'd take turns killing their hogs and slaughter them, and you'd take turns with them. Everybody helped each other. And none of these hogs, none of this meat went to waste. They just helped each other slaughter these hogs. And they would put the meat in smokehouses. Back before they had electricity and stuff, they put them in smokehouses and smoked their meat, preserve it. This got them by. And they rendered their own lard to cook with off of these hogs. So nothing went to waste. They made do with what they had. So these families, they knowed how to eat. They knowed how to survive. They didn't have a penny for nothing, but they knowed how to put food on the table. Now, a big thing people don't understand in these mountains, these country boys, rural areas, you learned to hunt when you was a young boy. You learned this growing up. This is part of your heritage and part of your tradition, generation after generation. And you learn at a real early age what different game is, how to hunt them. This is how it was. And you as a young boy, you learn how to catch these fish up in old creek or river, and you eat turtles, old snapping turtles, soft-shell turtles. They was good eating. And you learn from your uncles and your elders of the family how to live outdoors, how to survive, how to build fires, how to do things outdoors in the wild. And you loved it. And you knowed how to catch fish, what the different kinds of fish they are, what different kind of fish hit on, what their pattern is, and how to clean them and how to cook them. Now, some places in these mountains, and they still do, they have wild boar, they called razorbacks or whatever. They brought into this country. And if you didn't shoot one of them, if you're hunting them and you missed them, they'd take your leg off or kill you. These were dangerous animals. But they took a lot of pride in their hunting. Here's coons. Now these hides, they eat the meat, but they didn't just kill these just for nothing. This is how they made money off of these hides. And they took a lot of pride in their squirrel hunting too. Nothing better. Having a good hunt. Now I get out of these old woods in the wintertime, and I like to metal detect looking for old history. And I find these old shotgun shells to prove that this is all they done back then. I found hundreds of these old shotgun shells where these people got out and hunted. Here's an old one I found. I find them and I love them. Shotgun shell bacon. And you can see them here. Here's a Western New Chief. Here's that it's cleaned up. Here's the age on it. They started making them in 1898, quit making them in 1914. Them is some old shells. That's what they done back in these mountains. They hunted for game. And their proof of it is laying all in these woods. Here's just some of the old shells of how old they are I found. And I found all kinds of old bullets too. Even find really old bullets back when they used to make their own bullets, poured them in molds, these musket balls. When they come in this country settling it, really old. But nowadays, there's more game killed in the road than they are in the woods. Sad to say that, but that's the way it is. People don't hunt much like they used to, but they still hunt a lot. And back then, they trapped a lot. And they still trap a little bit today, but not like they used to. And what do you mean by trapping? Well, they don't just, they catch the animals and they eat the meat, but they skin them and they sell the furs. There was a big demand for fur back in the day. They made coats, jackets out of them. That's what they done with these hides. Now these animals, They eat about everything back during the Depression in these mountains, and always did. I've eaten about every one of these animals on here, except for a possum, a fox, and a skunk. I haven't eaten that. But that's the way it was in these mountains growing up. That's the way I was taught. And on the stove, there was always some kind of fresh meat on there, wild or something you grow. That's the way it was. And to me, growing up as a young boy, you learn to do this squirrel hunting, and there ain't nothing better than good squirrel meat if they're out of these hickories and oaks. Big old pan of fried squirrel, man is it good. I can remember as a young boy too. Fried squirrels, gravy and biscuits, oh, you don't know what you're missing. People don't understand. That's the way our life was. And when you had a house full of hungry kids back then and the garden didn't do good and you didn't have nothing, you could always go hunting. Always. Put food on the table for them babies. And most of these old kitchens, they look like this. They didn't have no modern conveniences, no running water, didn't have much of nothing, but they had an old stove, coal burning or wood burning or both stove. And I remember many a times growing up, there's always a pot of old soup beans on the stove, fried taters when you're lucky, and a good old pan of cornbread. What else could a country boy want? Now, they didn't have no money, but they knowed how to eat, and they knowed how to make it, where to get it, how to hunt it. That's just the way it was in these mountains, and it still is today. Now, our old people, they're dying off. I call them the greatest generation. They're all but gone, just a few. And I try to learn and share their history because it's being forgotten. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless every one of you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.